Part 2 of our discussion of evidence proving Joseph Smith indeed was a polygamist. Next on Polygamy. What love is this? Many people today are part of a new movement that claims it wasn't Joseph Smith who started Mormon polygamy or even practiced it, but it began with Brigham Young and others, and they blamed it all on Smith. Despite all the historical evidence, they don't want to be confused by the facts. A website that gives some great historical evidence about Smith's polygamy is MormonThing.com, and you can find the link on the screen. Someone commented recently that the people who reject Joseph Smith's polygamy, despite all the supporting evidence, accept the Book of Mormon, which has no evidence at all. They accept the testimony of only 3 witnesses about the Book of Mormon, but refuse to believe hundreds of personal, legal, and public witnesses about Smith's polygamy. We know that Joseph Smith has been exalted and glorified in the minds and hearts of many of people in the Mormon belief system, and in doing so have closed their minds and hearts to the historical evidence of his shenanigans. Now, the source of evidence for this series is a book written by Todd Compton, who authored In Sacred Loneliness, documenting and telling the stories of 34 of Joseph Smith's wives. Todd Compton has published a follow-up book on the topic. It is entitled In Sacred Loneliness, The Documents, published by Signature Books in Salt Lake City. Now, last time, part 1, we presented historical evidence of some of his wives' correspondence and their personal witness that they had been plural wives of Joseph Smith. And we ended with Mary Elizabeth Rollins Lightner, who had married Smith even though she was married to Adam Lightner. We begin this time with some historical evidence documentation of Patty Bartlett Sessions, another woman who was legally married to another man at the time she married Joseph Smith. Compton writes about Patty and her diaries being an important part of Mormon history as she described life in those early days.
Yeah, quite in detail here.
Yeah.
Pages 211 and 212. The Patty Sessions diaries are a remarkable record of a midwife and healer. She was an important part of the Mormon community simply for that reason. Sessions was a close friend of the leading Latter-day Saint women in Nauvoo, in winter quarters, and Utah, so her diary is an important record of the feminine hierarchy in early Mormon history. As a plural wife of Joseph Smith, she shared the bonds of sisterhood of that leading LDS family, though as a polyandrous wife, her marriage to Smith was not as well known as were the marriages of women such as Eliza Snows and Emily Partridge.
So obviously some women were more well known to have been his plural wives than others,
Right.
but most of them are documented as having been his plural wives.
Right.
Patty married her first husband, David, in June of 1812. When she was 47 years old, she married Joseph Smith in 1842, but continued living with her husband, David. Compton notes that both her husbands neglected to properly support her. I wonder if they thought, well, the other one will.
Maybe.
I think it doesn't give any details with that either, but Patty's diaries are filled with dates and events and well-known names of people who lived in those early days. Her diaries are accepted as genuine historical accounts. So again, are we to believe that only the portions of her accounts that don't deal with polygamy are trustworthy? The portions that do deal with polygamy are not to be believed. Patty had a daughter. Her name was Sylvia Sessions Lyon. Joseph Smith married Sylvia when she was 23 years old, a month before he married her mother,
Oh boy.
Patty Sessions. And as we've done before in these kinds of situations, we present what the Bible says about marriages like this one. We quote
From Leviticus 20:14. If a man takes a woman and her mother also, it is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. And Leviticus 18:20. And you shall not lie sexually with your neighbor's wife, and so make yourself unclean with her.
Joseph Smith married 11 women
Who were married.
who were already married to other men. God tells us that a man makes himself unclean when he commits adultery with another man's wife. Smith married Patty Sessions and her daughter Sylvia. God says marrying both mother and daughter is depravity. Smith also married several sets of sisters as rival wives. God calls these sexual activities an abomination. For the sake of time, we aren't even going to go through all the documentation of every wife. There's over 850 pages in the book.
Yeah.
And a huge number of those pages are filled with historical footnotes and bibliography and documented quotes and so on, leaving no doubt to a logical mind that the historical record of Smith's polygamy is genuine and accurate. But the next record we want to discuss is Eliza Roxy Snow. Eliza left a wealth of writings for history, not only her diaries, but also an autobiographical sketch that documents her life story. Much of the correspondence that Compton presents have little to do with polygamy or specifically her marriage to Joseph Smith, but there's enough to verify that it's true. But we want to ask those who discount evidence of Joseph Smith's polygamy, is historical evidence acceptable only when it does not deal with Joseph Smith's revelation and teachings of polygamy? Because he did have the revelation and he did teach it, but it was secret.
Yes.
It was secret.
Yeah.
So we quote from a letter that Eliza wrote to Wilmarth Margaret East on April 23rd of 1883.
This is on page 348. There is no virtue in breaking one law to keep another. We will do as we are directed by the priesthood. When persons are adopted to Joseph Smith, they are initiated into his family and become his heirs. A wife or someone to represent a wife as proxy must be present, but who is to be the mother is not designated. I officiated in the adoption of 75 individuals at one time when I was in St. George. Others have been adopted since who do me the honor to choose me for mother.
Now this is adopting people
Yes.
and dead people often into different families. Now there's a footnote to this adoption ritual that she's talking about, and this footnote will read, explains what she's talking about.
In Mormon adoption rituals, rank-and-file Mormons were adopted to Mormon leaders such as Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. Thus the leader became the eternal father, and one of his wives became the eternal mother. Evidently, the Easts had received permission to be adopted to Joseph Smith in the St. George Temple and requested Eliza R. Snow to be their mother, as she was a plural wife of Joseph Smith.
There you go.
There's an admission.
Yeah, there's an admission that she was a plural wife of Joseph Smith, and the records show that's why she was chosen to be adopted as a mother.
As the mother.
So that when they got on the other side, I guess their mother would be Eliza and their father would be Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
Now, is this to be discarded? Is this information to be discarded because it mentions Eliza's position as a plural wife? The Mormon records show these things happened. Eliza Snow is one of the best documented plural wives, and rather than Brigham Young finding and changing the historical data, he would have been high on an ego trip to have been able to snag so many widows of the previous prophet. We quote from In Sacred Loneliness, page 312, Eliza Snow's own testimony of her marriage to Joseph Smith.
I was sealed to the prophet Joseph Smith for time and eternity in accordance with the celestial law of marriage which God has revealed, the ceremony being performed by a servant of the Most High. The marriage took place on June 29, 1842, with Brigham Young officiating and Sarah M. Cleveland acting as witness.
So there's more proof.
Can't be more clear than that.
Right. Eliza, was 38 years old when this happened. She was 2 years older than Joseph Smith. Lorenzo Snow was Eliza's brother, and he later became president of the church and a polygamist with 9 wives and had 42 children. Sarah Cleveland was witness to Smith's and Eliza's marriage, and she also was a plural wife of Joseph Smith. Now, Emily Partridge is our next witness to Joseph Smith's polygamy. She and her sister Eliza, with Emma's knowledge, were both married to Joseph Smith. Not only that, but with Emma's permission. But this has a real twist to it.
Yeah.
Those who believe Smith was not a polygamist and that he and Emma had a lovely, happy, monogamous marriage are discounting a lot of trustworthy historical information which gives us a different story. From Emily Partridge's journal, and quoting from page 415 of Compton's book, we read this.
When I was 18 years or 19 years old, Joseph said to me one day, "Emily, if you will not betray me, I will tell you something for your benefit." Of course, I would keep his secret, but no opportunity offered for some time to say anything to me. As I was passing through the room where he sat alone, he asked me if I would burn it if he would write me a letter. As I felt very anxious to know what he had to tell me, I promised to do as he wished.
And then she says that later she started thinking about this conversation and decided that it was really quite improper for her to agree to it and for him to even ask it. But she was also curious to know what he wanted to write to her about. And so she became quite miserable over the situation. Well, Joseph Smith had an old woman named Mrs. Durfee as a helper to convince young girls to accept his proposals of marriage. And Durfee actually was also a plural wife of Joseph Smith. So he enlisted Durfee for help, and we read this.
Mrs. Durfee came to me one day and said Joseph would like an opportunity to talk with me. I asked her if she knew what he wanted. She said she thought he wanted me for a wife.
Okay, well, now curiosity has found out what this was all about. Now, Emily had been living in Joseph Smith's home. She had been helping Emma with her children and with her domestic household chores. Actually, Smith snared several of his young wives from the domestic help that Emma had. Now, remember, this information is from Emily's own journal. This is not hearsay. This is not something made up. Now, for the sake of time, we cannot go into detail on Smith's manipulation and proposal of plural marriage to Emily and her sister Eliza. But during that time, Joseph Smith and Emma had been having conversations among themselves about polygamy. We quote from Emily's diary, page 417 of Compton's book.
Sometime in the first part of May, Emma told Joseph she would give him 2 wives if he would let her choose them for him. She chose my sister and I, and helped explain the principles to us. We did not make much trouble, but were sealed in her presence with her full and free consent. It was on 11th of May, but before the day was over, she turned around, or repented of what she had done, and kept Joseph up till very late in the night talking to him. She kept close watch of us. If we were missing for a few minutes and Joseph was not at home, the house was searched from top to bottom and from one end to the other, and if we were not found, the neighborhood was searched until we were found. She sent for us one day to come to her room. Joseph was present, looking like a martyr. Emma said some very hard things. Joseph should give us up, or blood should flow. She would rather her blood would run pure than be polluted in this manner.
Now, this is interesting. I hadn't read this before.
Really?
In all of the research that I've done for different shows until I read this book on the documents. Then that's when. Wow. Now, I knew about the situation, but I hadn't read this particular account. And this is not a picture of a happy woman.
No.
It's not a picture of a happy marriage or a happy plural marriage, for that matter. Notice Emma said she felt polluted by polygamy and would have none of it. Emma could not have known that before this ceremony sealing of the Partridge sisters to her husband, they had already had a secret ceremony sealing both the sisters to her husband.
Before this?
Before this one, with Emma present. After this, Joseph Smith capitulated to Emma and turned Eliza and Emily Partridge out of his house with no place to go. And then he promptly forgot about them. It was like they never ever knew each other. And it's easy to see and understand how those who loved Joseph Smith and his charismatic image would reject that he could or would act this way. And he was also the prophet. Don't forget that. But this is what happened. Whose witness can we accept or reject over 175 years later? The witness of our own personal prejudice or the eyewitnesses? Of course, there's much more detail to this event, and we're just presenting various documentation of Joseph Smith's plural marriages.
But Emma maintained later that Joseph never took plural wives, right?
She did. She. But remember when we did the program about his sons?
Yes, and they came over.
And they came here and actually interviewed some of Joseph Smith's plural wife widows. And the one went into an insane asylum when he finally realized his father had been a polygamist.
That must have been an interesting conversation if they ever talked to their mother again.
Well, they did. Remember that he treated her when he went back home after he finally realized that plural marriage was true of his father. Right. He rejected her. He rejected his mother. Do you remember that particular part of the story, which I thought was interesting because he had always loved her and always been so kind and.
But she had lied to him.
But she lied to him, and I wonder if she lied to herself. And if it was so hard for her that she just couldn't even admit it to herself. I don't know. It'd be a hard thing.
It would.
She called it, she was polluted.
She must not have thought much of Mrs. Durfee either.
Yeah.
She must have been an interesting person.
You know, we ought to do part of a program on Mrs. Durfee. I don't think there's enough for her for a whole program, but we could do that. She was a real scoundrel.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I said, there's more details on this event. Of course, you can get the book and read and see the references, the historical references. But our next witness is Lucy Walker. We quote from page 511.
This autobiography is a record of Lucy's marriage to Smith. Lucy's account of this proposal and marriage shares many characteristics with Joseph's approaches and marriages to other teenaged wives, such as Helen Mar Kimball and Emily Partridge. In the cases of both Lucy and Helen, he told them that marrying him would provide heavenly benefits for their families.
Yeah, making things up as he went there. Now, he would frame his proposals as a commandment from God, making it a religious necessity. And it was not a mere proposal of marriage, but it had eternal consequences if they refused. This was the prophet. And they would think, how could he have gotten a message from God that wrong? Now, both Lucy and Helen were not pleased with his proposals at first. They knew it would force a break-off with the other teenagers, hanging out with the other teens their own age, and it did. Now, sadly, Lucy had a spiritual experience, as some of Smith's other prospects also had, which convinced them that they should accept plural marriage and become Joseph Smith's wife. Wow. Many people in polygamy and the LDS Church have profound spiritual experiences, but they are counterfeit. Spiritual experiences are not always from God. And this is important because it is important and powerfully deceptive. We have a few Bible passages to share with you and encourage you to take them to heart.
Yeah, there's a few of them here. 1 John 4, 1 and 2. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. Proverbs 14:15. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. 2 Corinthians 11:4. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. 2 Corinthians 11:13, 15. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds.
And there's other many other places in the Bible that we could use, but these are a good sample of spiritual experiences are not always from God. And it's for this very reason that we need to know God's Word, because that's the only way that we can recognize Satan's deceptions. And of course, Jesus had much to say about false prophets, and one of them is found in Matthew 7:15, where he says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." Well, inwardly, Joseph Smith is ravenous.
Boy,
He's described perfectly in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1.
But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction.
So you can know true from false, and the Bible alone is our measurement and our protection. Spiritual experiences are not the measurement of God's truths. In Lucy's own words, we quote what she said about Joseph Smith and marriage.
In the years 1842, President Joseph Smith sought an interview with me and said, "I have a message for you. I have been commanded of God to take another wife, and you are the woman." He asked me if I believed him to be a prophet of God. "Most assuredly I do," I replied. He fully explained to me the principle of plural or celestial marriage, said this principle was again to be restored for the benefit of the human family.
So she fell for it. Now, there's much more, of course, again, to this record and this proposal and the subsequent plural marriage ceremony. We don't have time, again, to cover all the details. But again, we have to question those who deny these historical personal records and witnesses, claiming they're false or that they've been tampered with by Brigham Young or others. It's astounding to think, not to mention actually believe it's possible to have vandalized the entire history of Joseph Smith's polygamy to that extent.
Yeah.
It
is.
I don't think it's
so much evidence.
Yeah. How could they get to all of the documents? Now, our next witness is Melissa Lott. She was Joseph Smith's 31st wife and married him September 20th, 1843. She was 19 years old. He was twice her age, 37. Melissa testified in the Temple Lot trial in 1892. About this trial and her testimony, Compton wrote this.
The Temple Lot trial was the result of the splintering of the Mormon community after Joseph Smith's death in 1844, and it shows how plural marriage was an important issue among the different LDS factions.
So we're focusing on the plural marriage part of this. He included an 1869 affidavit describing some details of Joseph Smith's marriage to Melissa Lott. Now, there is an historical court record.
Right.
It has not been subject to tampering by Brigham Young. Besides that, he was long dead. He couldn't have tampered with it. At the time of this event, Melissa was married to Ira Willis. We have the full transcript of her testimony in the Temple Lot trial, March 16, 1892, which Compton has published in his book in its entirety, beginning on page 646. But we're going to quote some of the relevant portions of her testimony in that court trial.
Question: will you state to the reporter what you know, if anything, in regard to the principle of plural wives or plural marriage, or what is generally called polygamy, being taught or practiced in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at Nauvoo during the lifetime of Joseph Smith?
Okay, during the lifetime of Joseph Smith,
Right.
So we have that time frame there. And she answered, well, I know that I was taught the principle of plural marriage by the prophet Joseph Smith himself. I know he taught it to me himself, and I was married to him in Nauvoo in 1843 myself. She's personalized that, himself, myself,
That's right.
and made that part of the court record. Okay.
Question: will you state to the reporter the facts in regard to your marriage with Joseph Smith or to Joseph Smith? Answer: well, I will state that I was married to him in Nauvoo. Question: well, what I mean is, who performed the marriage? Answer: Hiram Smith. Question, I will ask you, Mrs. Willis, if you were a wife of Joseph Smith in all that that word implies. The answer, yes, sir. Question, I will ask you to state to the reporter if the principle of plural marriage as taught by Joseph Smith is identical with the principle of plural marriage as contained in the revelation published by the church here in Utah. Answer, yes, sir.
Now, see, these people that deny Joseph Smith was a polygamist, they deny that he also taught it.
Yeah.
Or that he received the revelation. And right there, she says they did.
Yeah.
She was part of it. She was there. She wasn't just an eyewitness. She was a player.
And married to him. Yeah.
Now, there's much more to her testimony, which you can read in the book. Brigham Young had long ago passed away, and he could not have vandalized her testimony that she had been married to Joseph Smith. Now, you can read all about it and all the other eyewitnesses and the personal witness accounts, historical records in great detail in this book, In Sacred Loneliness, the documents. The facts are there. Refusing to believe the facts, despite the evidence, can only end in being led further and further into the darkness of spiritual deception. So we urge you.
How do they respond to the gospel topic essays that admit to Joseph Smith?
They think that the Mormon Church is also part of the vandalism, that they've also twisted the historical records to make him look like a polygamist. Why they would do that, why they would think that, I don't know. For years they denied he was. Yeah. The church denied he was a polygamist, and then all of a sudden they admitted it.
Yeah.
And then these guys think that, I don't know why they think the church would do that, but...
That's strange.
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
It is. Thank you, Earl.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Since the devil can counterfeit himself into an angel of light, and the demons can also counterfeit themselves into servants of righteousness, we humans need wisdom and discernment from God himself. The Bible tells us that Satan schemes against us, that he and his demons are the principalities and powers of this dark world. We need truth in our lives because only truth can set us free and protect us from spiritual deception. These deceptions can be in dreams or visions or spiritual experiences, feelings, but the Word of God shines the light on the deceptions around us. Jesus alone is the light. He has warned us against Satan's schemes, and one of those schemes is polygamy. Don't believe it. God is love, and God's love is not and has never been manifested in polygamy. And Joseph Smith was a polygamist. Thank you for watching.